Hello, Internet, and welcome to another episode of Experimental Cataclysm, the show where we talk about recent changes to the experimental version of Cataclysm Dark Days Ahead. Jumping right into it, first up today from Maricona, we've got a PR that makes long sticks more common when cutting up trees. Apparently, previously, you had a 50-50 chance of getting a long stick per tree section, so on average you would get about 2 sticks per tree. This PR ups that number so that each section can now spawn between 0 and 3 long sticks. This PR is working on the premise that there would be many long sticks in a tree and even refers to our trees as telephone poles, implying that it's like ridiculous that they don't give more long sticks. However, I don't know if I really agree with that. The long stick item is 8 feet long and a few inches thick, and it's used to make things like the spears or glaives and the bow staff, long items like that. For that to work, you would have to kind of be pretty selective about what counts as a viable piece of wood. I just don't think that there would be 12 suitable candidates like that on a tree. Now, that said, I'm not particularly rabid about my opinion here. I don't pay very much attention to trees, if I'm being perfectly honest. So anyway, all of that said, cutting down trees will now yield like substantially more long sticks than it would have previously. And then just to add here, I was talking to Aaron on Discord, and they pointed out that young trees actually give a ton of long sticks. So by comparison, this buff to tree segment drops when you chop down a tree, it actually makes a lot of sense compared to the young tree thing, and it's actually much more tame of a change than I originally thought, so I wanted to include that here. In my opinion, both the young trees and the chopping down of regular sized trees, they give entirely too many long sticks compared to what their size and length is supposed to be. But yeah, I guess, by comparison, it does make more sense than I originally thought, so I kind of want to walk back some of those things I said. Next up today from Knight, we have a PR which references another PR from Well That Worked. I'm not sure if Knight pulled stuff directly from that older PR or not, so I figured I would shout them out as well. But anyway, this change reworked the repair menu. So when you activate an item that's used to repair, such as a sewing kit, or if you use the percent menu, I'm not really familiar with that one, whatever, the game displays a menu of options. Now previously this was a bare bones menu. It basically just showed you a list of items that could potentially be repaired by whatever item you were using. However, now the menu displays significantly more information. This includes showing the tool at the top of the menu so you can see what charges you have in that tool. It also shows your current skill level for whatever skill is used by that item. So in the example of the sewing kit, it would be your tailoring skill. It will also display the materials available for use, the success chance for repairing the item, and the chance of damaging it if you fail. In my opinion, this is all pretty great. Having this information available in the menu, always there's some stuff that's more important than others, but having all of this right here is pretty handy. I'm also really fond of the trend of showing information at the top of menus. Like it's nice to be able to see what your tailoring skill is without having to back out and go to the character menu. So for instance, like the consume menu also does this. At the top, it'll display your current hunger and thirst, which it didn't used to do. And I'm actually really fond of that trend of putting stuff at that area of the menu. Ultimately, I don't really have anything to say about this PR or to explain. It's obviously very straightforward, and it's pretty much a universal upgrade. The only other thing I wanted to mention here is that there was a report of someone lagging significantly when they would open this menu. Initially, I ignored this, thinking it was just someone with a bad computer, but then there was a fix for this that got merged, so it obviously was a real issue for multiple people. The PR that fixed that problem seems pretty technical, so let's just call it magic and leave it at that, I guess. But anyway, that should have fixed this issue, so if you were having problems with that menu, you can try updating to a recent version and it should be fixed now. So yeah, just all around good stuff around this PR. Next up today from Lyle SY, we've got the addition of wolf skulls. Now, when you butcher a wolf or a certain kind of dog, you will receive a wolf skull. Now, although I regard this mainly as a collector thing, because who wouldn't collect skulls, but it actually can be used to make a wolf skull helmet. This also seems to be more of a for fun sort of thing. The protection values on that helmet are not great or anything. Shockingly, canine skulls are not really great ballistic protection. Anyway, this is a simple change that I don't have a huge opinion on. The only thing I wanted to say here is that it's called a wolf skull, but it can actually be received by some of the larger dog species. Now, I understand that dogs and wolves are very similar, but they are not the same. I think it would be better to call this like a canine skull, or alternatively restrict it to only be harvestable from wolves. Harvestable, is that a word? Now, admittedly, the only non-wolves that it appears to be able to be harvested from are the Coyote and the Great Pyrenees. I think this actually raises an additional issue. Coyotes tend to be really small and scrawny compared to something as massive as a Great Pyrenees, so I kind of think there's some issues with this size comparison here. Ultimately though, none of that is really much of an issue. The takeaway here is that you can now stack a pile of wolf skulls next to your bed. Now next up today, we've got 3 changes related to spears. First, from Mr. Draw Master, we've got the ability to use spears to attack through barred windows, provided that they don't have glass in them. Now this is pretty simple. You can use a reach attack to hit an enemy on the other side of a barred window. Now I thought that this was something that had been possible in the game previously, but then it got removed, or maybe I'm misremembering. Now regardless though, this is a nice little thing that tracks with realism. You would obviously be able to jab enemies through a barred window with no real risk to you or your weapon. The next spear change is from a noob in disguise, and it buffed the stone spear. However, part of this was then further changed in the next PR that we're going to talk about in a moment. So this PR set the damage of the stone spear to 5 bash and 24 pierce, which was a flat buff and in fact was a buff of 9 points to the pierce damage. That's a pretty significant increase, and it did change the DPS of that weapon pretty noticeably. Now I mention this mostly because it probably sucks to make a change like this in the game and then have it immediately changed by another PR, which is what happened here. So I wanted to shout them out. Plus, even after the nerf that it received in the next PR, it is still an overall better weapon than it was a week ago, so you might find it more viable in your game. However, as I said, this was then changed by another PR, which is from Aaron. Now this PR sought to completely rework many of the spears in the game. For the stone spear, this meant that the damage was changed again from the new 5 bash and 24 pierce to 8 bash and 20 pierce. Now again, that is still significantly better than it was a couple of weeks ago. I'm not going to cover every change that Aaron made here. It was quite a large rework to many of the spears in the game. And Aaron has a Google document listed in the PR that you can take a look at if you want an in-depth explanation of what they did and why. In summary, they assessed length and volume for spears. Many of them previously were comparable to a longsword, which obviously does not make sense. Their crafting recipes were also changed so that the more well-manufactured spears will now require a new spear shaft item. This is to show that you're selecting and treating the wood rather than literally just putting a metal point on a random stick and calling that a spear. Now while this does obviously add some annoyance in that you need to craft a new component item, it also means that these weapons will now have a better grip and a better balance, meaning that their 2 hit values will be better. I know that it's easy to see some of this as nerfs and hurdles to getting a spear, but many things were buffed here and the overall progression in spears seems much better. So for instance, the steel spear now deals slightly less damage after the rework, but the DPS and the 2 hit values are better. Anyway, the TLDR is that early game spears are slightly worse and later game spears are slightly better. Many of them had their volumes changed, which leads to a better moves per attack and therefore tweaks their DPS. The higher tiers now require the spear shaft item, which is a new item, and while it is slightly annoying to have to do this, it has led to general better to hit values. And hopefully that's everything and I didn't miss something obvious. This is basically just me telling you, hey, you need to reassess your crafts and your spears because they've changed slightly. Next up today from StubCon, we've got a message that appears when you fire your gun. Very simple change. If your gun's volume is above a certain threshold, a message will be displayed in the log saying that you shoot. Now at first I thought like, oh, this is kind of silly and redundant. You see the animation of your bullet firing and the animation of the shell casing being dropped. You will also hear a gunshot, etc., etc. Do we really need a message that tells you fired a gun? But ultimately that's not really correct. In the game you can actually disable those animations, and of course the game does not come with a sound pack by default. Actually, we do have a sound pack. Is there a sound pack that comes with the game now? I'm pretty sure there is. But anyway, there are plenty of people who would not see those indicators that their gun had fired. They won't hear the sound and they won't see the animation. So anyway, this adds simple messages in the log to reflect that you fired your gun. The message will depend on your gun volume and it will change depending on if you're using single fire or auto fire, things like that. So yeah, pew pew, etc. Next up today, we've got a new location from Onura 46. This is a farm supply store, and for those of you who are not from the country / don't play farming simulator, a farm supply store has farm supplies, shockingly. The biggest one in the United States is probably Tractor Supply. They sell a variety of items. You can get power tools, lawnmowers, tractor supplies, animal feed, water tanks, gates, wire, fencing, blah blah, many things. Now when I saw this PR, I was pretty excited. I thought, oh, that's actually really cool. A farm supply store would have a lot of miscellaneous crap that the player might want. Specifically, I was thinking about power tools and construction materials. And I'm generally pretty happy whenever I see a new location being added to the game in the first place. However, I'm just going to quote the PR here. It says, since these virtually unprotected superstores would be prime targets for survival supplies, looted variants are more common. And it goes on to say that unlooted variants are only 30% of what would appear in the game. I do just disagree with this take in general, and with them being looted like 70% of the time. These are not prime targets for looting in my opinion, or at least not in the way that's represented in the game. Mostly these sort of stores appear in really rural areas, and people are not going to head out to loot a farm supply store. Rioting and looting typically occurs in cities, not in small rural towns, and in terms of panic buying, no one panic buys farm equipment. I hate to bring this up, but we remember when we had that big global pandemic in real life, like the last 2 to 3 years, stores were pretty empty, supply chains were disrupted, and people were hoarding stupid things like toilet paper, panic buying water, etc., etc. Well, shockingly, during that time, people were not panic buying like a lawnmower attachment for their tractor. No one bought up the global supply of chicken wire or fence posts. The idea that rioting occurred in Cataclysm and that people were targeting this farm store to the point where it's basically empty of goods is a pretty bonkers suggestion. And I'm going to try to keep my ranting in check here. We've talked about my feelings previously on looted variants of buildings in the game. If panic buying and looting occurred before the global population died in the game, then this is not the sort of place people would be looting based on the real world data that we've seen in the past. People tend to loot essentials like food and water, and then luxury items that are very expensive. No one is looting a plow for a tractor or stealing 30 water tanks. This is also true for panic buying in emergency situations. People tend to buy things that they think will be in short supply or are considered essential. People do not panic buy fencing or appliances or tow hitches. And then also, if this looting occurred post-apocalypse after most of the population was dead, like by survivors like the player, then it's even more absurd to think that people would have carried like literally tens of thousands of pounds of tools, animal feed, vehicle parts, and construction materials out of these stores. Now, all of that said, I think I'm done. Credit where it's due. This is a thing that did not exist in the game previously. Even if I disagree with the choices surrounding them being looted, it is nice to see another large piece of map gen get added to the game. And this is especially true because we didn't have this sort of thing previously. It's not really a reskin of an existing location. A farm store is pretty unique. Also, full disclosure, I live in the middle of nowhere and I'm kind of a country bumpkin. So a farm store represents kind of the area that I live in, so I like seeing it added to the game. I'm trying to be a little less negative than I would have been in the past, but it is a thing that I got stuck on when I was reviewing this change. Anyway, yeah, rant over. Hit me up in the comments. I know some of you will disagree with me. Next up today from P. Shep Jr., we've got the addition of strip malls. Now these, I've been told, don't really exist in many other countries, so let's talk about that, I guess. Basically, a strip mall is a small strip of building with multiple storefronts. But like near me, where there's one that I go to, it's like a laundromat, a new age bookstore, a Chinese restaurant, and like a thing to do with vehicle registration. I don't know what the other one is. So it's just a strip of connected shops, parking out front, and usually there's like dumpsters and crap in the rear. Now in this PR, it's a 5x1 location with 4 shops and a parking lot. Each shop has a range of potential spawns, so they will not be the same every time. There is a list for each potential shop in the PR. It's a mix of stuff from like a gym to a hair salon to clothing shops to restaurants. Now I do really like this. As always, I'm a big fan of the nested chunks system to add some extra randomness to larger locations. We actually talked in the past about setting up the entire mall like that, so it would always have like completely randomized shops every time you go into it. In general though, stuff like this, all that nested chunk stuff, that's kind of a lot of work, so it's rare that you see people take full advantage of that system. Anyway, yeah, strip malls are very common in the United States, and it makes a lot of sense for them to be added to the game. game. I think in general it will be a bit hard to fit a 5x1 location into our existing city map gen. I'm really not sure how common they'll be or how that's gonna work out exactly. The images in the PR show it at the edge of town rather than in the center, so it is possible they only spawn in like out of the way locations like that. And this of course is ripe for expansion in the future. The layout work for the shops is already done. If someone wanted to expand this further by adding more possible shop locations, they could very easily do that. So ultimately this is just an all-around good thing, again provided that they spawn properly without any issues. Also, they did add signs for each possible shop, and I think that's a really nice touch, as are the benches and like trees out front. And then finally today, a late addition to this video, there is a new tile set. Now I usually don't cover tile set stuff, sometimes people request it, I just don't have a ton of interest in it personally. Anyway, yeah, there is a new tile set which is included with the game, so when you download a more recent version it will be available to you. This would be the Altica ISO tile set, an isometric version of Altica. Now I really love the old school XCOM games from the 90s, like I really love them, and because of that isometric tile sets always trigger like some sort of nostalgia for me. But yeah, I don't really have much to say about it. I did not look at this in detail. I do think it looks really great, but I'm also not in the market for switching up my tile set. Something I'm old and change is scary. Still though, if you're on recent experimentals, as of I think Monday is when this was included, it will now be included with your game download. So check it out if you find it at all interesting. Presumably I've had it on screen here this whole time. Now coming in here with an addendum, I did take some time to play with the new tile set. To be honest, it's a little less appealing than I originally thought. No disrespect to the creators, of course, it's just that many tiles are not yet represented in this tile set, so it leads to this jumble of ASCII that I find a bit, I guess busy is probably the right word. The different colors of the ASCII and the background colors for the tiles, it's just very colorful and it's pretty hard on the eyes in my opinion. Additionally, I wanted to mention that if you do choose to check out this tile set, there is an option in the debug section of the settings menu to allow for walls to collapse so that you can see your character. Without this setting enabled, when your character walks into a corner, you just literally can't see yourself or items that are there because the walls will block the point of view. So that seems like a worthwhile thing to point out, and I kind of think this should be enabled by default, but it wasn't when I went in my game, so yeah, it's definitely worth talking about. Then next up, I actually lied to you. The tile set change was not the last thing we're going to talk about because we have another late addition from Aaron. This PR adds sheet metal weapons to the game. It adds a few crude metal weapons as well as alters the damage of the large wooden club and the plank. Now I won't be covering this in detail, frankly I forgot about it until the very last minute. I'm recording this section here on Thursday and this video has to go up tomorrow. So yeah, if I'm not brief, we're not going to get the video out on time. Anyway, this PR added a variety of sheet metal weapons to the game. Just like we discussed with the sheet metal armors, these occupy a sort of middle ground between low tier weapons and end game high tier weapons. Now according to Aaron, written in the PR here, it says the thing that got the most love were great swords. They now have a full progression from wood to scrap to forged metal. Okay, and every time I see this word, I know that zwei means two in German, but everyone says zwei, so don't judge me here. So yeah, they go zwei timber, which is the wooden one. Then there's the scrap greatsword. Then there is the bolted / welded greatsword, which is the sheet metal one. And then finally you get to the proper metal greatsword, which is like what you would traditionally think of from a medieval setting. This sort of gradual progression to a weapon type is something that's generally not very fleshed out in this game. The most easy example of this progression in the game is probably spears, since we have like 8 spears that gradually increase in quality and difficulty to craft as they get better and better. Now regarding the large club, we should talk about that since that's a bit of an outlier. Obviously it's not a metal weapon or something you would necessarily expect to get touched in a PR like this. So regarding the large wooden club, honestly its damage was just way too high for the simple object that it was, and this is also true for the plank item in the game as well. This PR straight up lowered their damage, and in general though, planks were already, not a super viable weapon. And the heavy club, I guess I just don't know. I don't think I've used the heavy club yet. They were only added like 5 months ago, if even that long ago. So yeah, sorry to be brief about that, but gotta get the video out there. I think the PR also added like a scrap rapier or something like that as well. But yeah, I think that's a wrap on this week's show. Everyone, thank you for watching. One of these days I'll get around to making another tutorial video and putting it out on the channel. Well, someday, TM. Anyway, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.